The email had been sitting in his drafts folder for 11 days. Not because he forgot it. Because every time Daniel Ashford opened that folder and let his eyes rest on the subject line he had typed at 2 in the morning, his hand found the mouse, the cursor drifted to delete, and something cracked. Some hairline fracture between who he needed to be and who he was afraid to become. 3 seconds. Always exactly 3 seconds. Then he closed the laptop and walked away. Nobody in the building knew the email existed. Nobody knew what was inside it. Nobody knew that a man who had spent 22 years building a reputation for precision and quiet integrity was now paralyzed, night after night, by 4 to 7 words he could not bring himself to send. What was in those 4 to 7 words? Hold that question, because the answer will not come the way you expect. Daniel was 44 years old, and he had a habit that people who worked near him noticed but rarely mentioned. Every morning, before he opened a single message or touched a single report, he made 1 cup of coffee, black, no sugar, set it on the left side of his desk, and let it go completely cold before he drank it. Not because he preferred cold coffee, because waiting, sitting with a thing without rushing it, was the only discipline he had deliberately carried forward from the man he was before the accident. The ritual cost him nothing. It reminded him daily of a distinction that most people blurred without noticing. The difference between the right time and the comfortable time. They were almost never the same. He had a second habit that nobody knew about. He read every document completely. Every procedural update, every policy revision, every employee handbook, cover to cover, on slow Friday afternoons, because he held a private and fixed belief that the fine print was where the actual world lived. You could not act on what you had not actually read. You could not find what you had never looked for. 22 years of systems work had confirmed this principle enough times that he had stopped questioning it. The fine print, in his experience, was not fine at all. It was the whole thing, written small on the assumption that most people would not bother. He never talked about the accident. 3 years ago, a colleague had asked once, gently, and Daniel had gone very still and said, "I'd rather not." What remained was a faint stiffness in his left shoulder that flared in cold weather, and a particular carefulness in his eyes, the look of a man who has learned, at real cost, that some moments do not give you a second pass. He worked as a senior systems analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm in the Pacific Northwest. Unremarkable title. A desk by a window that overlooked a concrete parking structure. He was not the most ambitious man in the building. He was, without question, the most thorough. He checked everything twice. His documentation was more complete than company policy required. He was the kind of employee an organization only fully understood it needed on the day it no longer had him. His flaw, named privately by the few people who knew him well, though never to his face, was that he trusted systems more than he trusted himself. Give him a clear process and he was unstoppable. Give him a moment that required instinct, that asked him to step forward without a net, and he would hesitate. Not visibly, not long, but long enough. The email had required instinct. He had written it anyway, at 2 in the morning, with a clarity that comes only when a man is too tired to talk himself out of what he knows. The email was addressed to a man named Richard Colt. Remember that name. Richard Colt was the regional director of operations, corner office, 2 floors up, a professional reputation that arrived in rooms before he did. 18 months at the firm, trailing a record of efficiency improvements that the board spoke about in hushed, admiring tones. What the board did not speak about was how those improvements were made. What they extracted from the people below Richard Colt. Who actually wrote the work that Richard presented? Daniel had watched it happen within his first month of paying attention. The pattern was not subtle once you knew what to look for. Richard took the analytical work of junior employees, detailed, rigorous, original, stripped the names from it, polished the surface, and presented it upward as his own synthesis. 3 junior analysts had transferred out in the past year. The language they used on their way out was always careful, always professional, always notably empty of specifics. Nobody wanted to be the one who said it out loud. Daniel had documented every instance. With dates. With file names. With the methodical discipline of a man who understood that facts mean nothing unless they exist in a form that cannot be argued away. 6 weeks before the email landed in his drafts folder, he had been in the east stairwell, taking the stairs because the elevator was slow and he had somewhere to be. When he heard it, Richard's voice, low and completely certain of itself. Then another voice, younger, measured in the particular way that people become measured when they understand that the room they are standing in is not safe and the person across from them is perfectly aware of that fact. Her name was Petra Connolly, 26 years old, 2 years at the firm. The sharpest methodological mind Daniel had encountered since he was young enough to be considered one himself. Richard was telling her that her methodology report was not ready for senior eyes, and that he would clean it up before presenting it. She said, "Of course." She thanked him. The thanks was the worst part, the way it came out whole and professional, no crack in it, because she had learned, the way people learn in rooms with no safe exits, to give them exactly what they want without letting them see what it costs. She walked out of the stairwell past the landing where Daniel was standing with a sandwich he had forgotten to eat, and she did not look up. Either she hadn't seen him, or she had decided it was safer to act as though she hadn't. He stood in the stairwell for a long time after she left. The building's ventilation hummed. Below him, somewhere, a door opened and settled closed. He thought about a version of himself that existed before the accident, a version that would have walked up those stairs without stopping, opened the door, and said something directly and without calculation. He thought about that man the way you think about a country you once lived in and know you cannot return to, with a grief that has no clean name, and no use, and will not go away. That night, he wrote the 4 to 7 words, addressed to Richard Colt, copied to Human Resources and the Chief Operations Officer. No accusations beyond the facts. A specific, documented account, the stairwell exchange, the file metadata showing a document bearing Petra Connolly's initials had been modified by Richard Colt's credentials 9 days before the quarterly review. Precise. Clean. The kind of record that a careful man builds. And then he stopped. Richard was powerful in ways the org chart didn't show. 2 board members had worked under him at his previous firm. A senior vice president position was open, and Richard's name was the one that moved through the walls of the executive suite when people forgot that sound carried. If the email landed and Richard survived it, and men in corner offices had a long history of surviving things, Daniel would not survive the aftermath. 22 years. Gone. He was not young enough to rebuild from nothing. The career was the only net he had. So the email Saturday, and the cursor hovered, and the 3 seconds passed, night after night, like a verdict he kept refusing to deliver. 2 weeks after he wrote it, Petra Connolly submitted her resignation. She stopped at his desk on her last afternoon, a cardboard box under one arm. She set a small succulent in a terracotta pot beside his keyboard. A yellow post-it on the pot said, in her handwriting, *, this one survives neglect *. She looked at him steadily and said, "I knew you always meant well, Daniel." She said it without bitterness, without accusation, with the particular clarity of someone setting down something they had been carrying long enough to know precisely how heavy it was. He held the little pot in both hands and could not find a single word proportionate to what she had just given him. She left at 5:17. He stayed until 9, and when he finally went, he left the desk lamp on over the succulent. The plant sat in the empty office beneath it, small and specific and still. Some things wait in the dark without knowing they are waiting. If you have ever watched someone good walk out of a building carrying a box while the wrong person sat upstairs in a corner office, don't go anywhere, because the next 2 weeks were about to break something open. 2 days after Petra left, Richard walked into the quarterly review and presented a full operational methodology analysis. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something impressive is happening. The chief operations officer leaned forward. A board liaison nodded slowly, twice. The analysis was laid and precise, with an architectural intelligence that Daniel recognized immediately. He had seen a draft of a document structured exactly this way 3 weeks ago, sitting in the shared drive under a file name that began with the initials *PC*. The initials were gone. The name on the final slide was Richard Colt. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need at the senior level," the COO said. Richard received a standing commendation. He accepted it the way he accepted everything, with the measured gratitude of a man who believes he has earned what he is given. Daniel sat at that table and felt something he had no clean word for. Not rage, not despair, something that lived in the space between them, in the particular silence of a witness who has seen an injustice performed so smoothly that the world around it did not even flinch. He said nothing. He went back to his desk and typed the date, the time, the precise language he remembered, into a file that only he could access. Then he opened his drafts folder and read the 4 to 7 words again. He closed it without sending. 3 days later, a junior analyst found him in the break room and delivered the news with eyes averted. Daniel's department budget had been cut 12%. A structural optimization recommended by a cross-divisional review chaired by Richard Colt. 12% meant one position. Daniel would have to choose who on his team lost their job. He sat in his car in the parking structure for 11 minutes. The left shoulder ached the way it always did when something important was breaking. He thought about the accident, not the details, never the details, but the aftermath. The quality of the silence that follows something irreversible. The way the world does not stop to mark the moment a harm becomes permanent. He went back upstairs. He had barely opened his drafts folder when Richard Colt knocked on his open door, stepped inside without waiting, and closed it behind him. I heard about the budget adjustment. Richard sat down without being offered the chair. I want you to know that wasn't personal. These decisions are structural. A pause, not a real pause. The kind a man performs when he is pretending to think rather than actually thinking. I've been watching your work. You're systematic. Thorough. That's Ray. I'm building a team for the SVP transition. Elevated visibility. The kind of assignment that does real things for a career. I'd like you to consider it. The offer sat in the air between them like a door with no handle on the inside. Daniel understood exactly what it was. Richard had deduced, or suspected, that Daniel had been watching. This was not recognition. This was a lock. Step through. And the conversation about the stairwell never happens. Step through. And the 4 to 7 words stay in the folder until they age into nothing. I'll think about it, Daniel said. Richard smiled. Don't think too long. He stood and left, and the door settled shut behind him with the quiet authority of something being closed. Daniel sat for a long time looking at the parking structure through his window. He picked up his cold coffee and drank it slowly, not because he had forgotten it was cold, but because the ritual was the ritual, and some things you hold on to not because they are useful but because they are yours. That night he did not open the drafts folder. He sat in his kitchen and thought about a man he had not thought about in 6 years. A man named Owen Reese. Owen had been a vendor rep, quiet, mid-30s, methodical in the careful way of someone who has taught themselves to be thorough rather than being born that way. He had come through Daniel's office for a 2-day software assessment 6 years ago. On the second afternoon, over lunch, he mentioned almost as an aside that he was trying to reach a contact at a larger firm. He had named the person. Daniel had known them, a mutual connection from a previous job. Without overthinking it, he had sent a 3-sentence email after Owen left. A brief introduction, a genuine note about Owen's methodology, a line about his own experience working with him. He had moved on to the next thing before the sent confirmation had fully loaded. He had never thought about it again. Some threads disappear into the world without telling you where they are going. He still didn't know, sitting in his kitchen that night, why Owen Reese had surfaced in his mind. He put down his cold tea and went to bed without understanding it. On a Tuesday morning 17 days after Petra left the building, a man Daniel had never seen walked through the front doors and asked for the chief operations officer. He was in his early 40s, precise in his posture, carrying a leather case with the particular calm of someone who walks into organizations that have complicated things to account for and has done it many times before. His name was Thomas Reese, Owen's younger brother, an independent auditor, specializing in operational reviews for mid-sized logistics firms. He had been retained 3 weeks earlier by the board's independent oversight committee, following an anonymous report filed through the firm's ethics disclosure channel, a channel that existed on page 41 of the employee handbook, just below the section on parking validation, and which most employees had never found because most people do not finish employee handbooks. The report had been filed anonymously. It was specific, documented, cross-referenced with file metadata and a dated account of a witnessed exchange in an east stairwell. No editorializing. No accusations beyond the facts. Its summary ran to 4 to 7 words. Thomas spent 4 days in the building. He pulled the shared drive archives, the attendance logs for every executive review meeting going back 18 months, the complete file histories, creation date, modification date, the credentials attached to every change, for the documents Richard Colt had presented at quarterly reviews. The metadata did not leave room for interpretation. Documents originated under one user's login. Modified, hours before presentation, under Richard Colt's. The same pattern, the same timing, 12 times. On the 5th day, Thomas met with the COO and the 2 board members who had worked with Richard at his previous firm. 2 hours and 20 minutes. The door stayed closed. 4 days after that meeting, an all-staff communication went out. Leadership restructuring. Measured language, carefully chosen for its imprecision. But the fact beneath the language was simple. Richard Colt's office was empty by noon. Not just vacant, cleared. The nameplate had been removed from the door, leaving a pale rectangular shadow on the wood where it had hung for 18 months. The desk was bare. 2 monitors, gone. The leather chair was pushed neatly in, aligned precisely with the desk's edge, the way furniture looks when it has been set in order by someone who will not be returning. The framed commendations that had lined the wall behind the desk, the ones that always caught the light when you passed in the corridor, were down. The wall behind them was a slightly brighter shade than the rest of the room, unmarked by the years, the way a surface looks when something has been protecting it from the air without anyone realizing. Daniel walked past the door once. Just once. He did not stop. He did not pause to look through the glass. He kept walking, back toward the stairs, back toward his desk by the parking structure window, and as he walked he felt something shift in him. Not triumph, nothing that clean, but a specific and irreversible settling, like a bone finding its proper position after a long time out of joint. The building heard it the way buildings hear things, in the quality of the silence that falls when something significant shifts and no one yet knows the shape of what is left. Daniel was at his desk, cold coffee on his left side, staring at a spreadsheet he was not reading. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Asterisk, this is Thomas Reese. I believe you know my brother Owen. Could we speak? Asterisk. He read it once. A second message arrived before he could respond. Asterisk, Owen asked me to tell you something. He said you wouldn't remember what you did for him. He said that was exactly the point. Asterisk. Daniel went very still. He called Thomas back. Thomas explained it the way an auditor explains things, as a sequence of facts, in order, without drama. Owen had seen the routine industry announcement of the consulting engagement and recognized the company name. He had called his brother. He had said, I know someone there. He's a careful man. Make sure the process works. Thomas had done his job, followed the documentation, let the evidence lead. That was all. But the anonymous ethics report had already been filed before Thomas walked through the door. Daniel had filed it himself. On the 12th night, Petra's last night in the building, after she left him holding a terracotta pot with words on it he wasn't ready to answer. He had gone home and opened his laptop, and instead of opening the drafts folder, he had opened the employee handbook. He read it the way he always read documents, from the beginning, fully, without skipping. On page 41, below parking validation, he found the ethics disclosure channel. Independent, protected, routed directly to the board's oversight committee, bypassing management entirely. He had found the explicit protections for those who filed. He had written a full report, not 47 words, but everything. The dates, the file metadata, the stairwell account, the 18 months of records he had been quietly preserving. He filed it at 1:08 in the morning through a portal that returned one automated acknowledgement and then went silent. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. He went to work the next morning, made his coffee, set it on the left side of his desk, and waited. He had never sent the email to Richard Colt directly. That one he had never been able to do. The exposure was too direct, the risk too visible, the outcome too dependent on Richard's power absorbing the blow without flinching. But page 41 had given him something else. A room the email couldn't reach. A channel that didn't pass through the people it was about. He had found it where careful people find things, in the part of the document that everyone else had skipped. He had filed it not knowing if it would go anywhere. Not knowing about Owen. Not knowing about Thomas. Not knowing that 6 years ago, 3 sentences sent without thinking had placed his name in the mind of a man who would one day be exactly where the story needed him. He had simply done the one thing he could do, and then let go of the rope before he could see the ground. The budget cut to his department was reversed within 10 days of Richard's departure. The eliminated position was reinstated. The junior analyst who had been quietly updating his resume closed the tab. Nobody connected these restorations formally to anything. They simply happened, the way things move when an obstruction is cleared and what was suppressed begins, quietly, to breathe. If you have watched something good nearly vanish while someone else took credit for the light, share this story, because this is what it looks like when the hand that was always there finally becomes visible. 6 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived for Daniel at his home address. He had not given it to Petra. He had not known she had it. And the small mystery of that, she had found it the way careful people find things, made him smile in a way that felt unfamiliar, like a muscle remembering its old motion. She wrote that she had heard about the restructuring, that she had been offered her position back, with a formal acknowledgement of her contributions and a direct apology from the COO. She had decided not to return, not from bitterness, but because something else had opened, a role at a smaller firm where she would be leading her own team, the kind of position she hadn't known she was ready for until she had been forced to leave the one she had. She wrote that she didn't know what he had or hadn't done. She hoped whoever told the truth had found some peace in it. She signed it. *P. He kept the letter in his desk drawer, beside the succulent that had continued, without any particular intervention, to grow. 3 months after that, a note came from the COO, handwritten, which surprised him. It seemed to be a season for handwritten things. The board had completed its review. New protections for ethics disclosures. A direct reporting line to the Independent Oversight Committee. A formal attribution policy requiring all analytical work to carry the name of its originating contributor, regardless of who presented it. At the bottom, in a hand slightly less controlled than the rest, as though the line arrived as a thought rather than a plan, the COO had written, *, we don't always know who the careful people are. But the careful people are why the building stands. *. Daniel read it once, set it beside the succulent. Then he did something he had not done in 3 years. He picked up his coffee while it was still warm and drank it, not because the ritual was broken, because something in him had shifted, the particular, irreversible shift of a man who has stopped waiting to feel ready and started trusting what he already knows. The next week, when a junior analyst presented preliminary findings in a team meeting and a senior manager interrupted with the tone of someone who has never questioned their own authority, Daniel looked up from his notes. "That's Elena's methodology," he said, calmly, without preamble. "It's sound. Let her finish." The room adjusted the way rooms adjust when someone says a true thing with enough steadiness that it doesn't feel like a confrontation. It feels like a correction. Elena finished. The senior manager moved on. Daniel went back to his notes. He did not make a thing of it. He did not look around for acknowledgement. He had said what was true, and that was the whole of it. Elena stopped him in the corridor afterward. She said, "Thank you." She said it quickly, like someone who isn't sure how much room they have to take up. He said, "Your work is good. It should have your name on it." She nodded. They went their separate ways. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not meant to be. He opened the drafts folder one last time. Read the 4 to 7 words. Did not delete them. He did not erase things that were part of what had happened. He archived them. Then he closed the laptop. The succulent had 4 new leaves. He had not watered it on any particular schedule. He had not moved it toward or away from the light. He had simply not removed it from the window, not thrown it away in a moment of discouragement, not decided that something so small in a terracotta pot was too fragile to survive an office with its uncertainties. Some things grow because someone good once placed them where they could. Not with a strategy, not with any knowledge of what they would become, just with the quiet decision not to take them out of the light, even when the cost was real, even when the silence asked whether any of it was being seen, even when the cursor hovered for 3 seconds and the easiest word in the world sat right there, patient and available. He hadn't pressed it. And somewhere, 6 years back, 3 sentences had moved through the invisible architecture of the world, no expectation of return, no knowledge of where they were going, and had become the thread that pulled everything into place at the moment it was needed most. That is the thing about what we send into the world when no one is watching. It does not vanish. It travels to places we will never see, and it arrives exactly when it is supposed to. What are you hovering over right now? The right thing, the harder thing, the one that costs you something you're not sure you can afford. Leave it in the comments. Someone in this story found out that doing it quietly, without an audience, without knowing the outcome, was never wasted. Someone reading this needs to hear the same thing. This is God's Hand Stories, where every story has a hand behind it you didn't see until the very end.